Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 45th day of the 108th Legislature second session. Our chaplain for today is Father Brian Kane of St. Gregory the Great Seminary of Seward, Nebraska, Senator Janet Hughes' district. Please rise.
Let us pray. We pray, Almighty and eternal God, who alone are good, to endow with heavenly knowledge, wisdom, and justice, through whom authority is administered and laws are enacted and judgment is decreed, that you assist with your spirit of counsel the legislature of the state of Nebraska. Let the light of your wisdom direct their deliberations as they gather here today and tonight, shine forth in all of their proceedings and laws, so that they may work to the preservation of peace and the promotion of the good life in our state. May their labors bring about the blessing of liberty, to live up to our state's motto, equality before the law. We pray for our governor and lieutenant governor, for the members of the legislature and all who assist them. We also commend to your care all of our judges and others who are appointed to guard our state and nation, that they might be, by your protection, have the ability to discharge their duties with honesty and goodness. And finally, we pray today for all of our fellow citizens throughout Nebraska, especially those who are most in need, that we all may be preserved with the peace that you give. And we make these prayers in your holy name. Amen.
I recognize Senator Mike Jacobson to lead the pledge.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 45th day of the 108th Legislative Second Session. Senators, please record your presence. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
No corrections this morning.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are. I have a report from the Judiciary Committee. On March 15th, the following bills were presented to the governor: LB 61, 198, 304, 771, 771A, 844, 895, 938, and 1104. Finally, the Health and Human Services Committee will be holding an executive session in room 2022 at 10 o'clock a.m. That would be now.
Senator Hughes would like to recognize the Doctor of the Day, Pat Hotovy of York, Nebraska, located underneath the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska State Legislature. We will now proceed to the first item on the agenda. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the first bill this morning is Legislative Bill 137. I do have ENR amendments.
Senator Bosson, you're recognized. Senator McKinney for a motion.
I move to adopt the ENR amendments to LB 137.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. They are adopted. Mr. Clerk, next item.
Next item, Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to bracket the bill until April 11th.
Senator Cavanaugh, Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So this motion to bracket until April 11th is, I have to pick a day that we're still in session to bracket it until, so I picked one, I think it's day 58 or 59. So if you recall, on general file, I stood opposed to LB 137 and I remain opposed to LB 137. I don't think that this is going to help us address our opioid crisis in this state, and we have a severe prison overcrowding. So creating enhanced penalties does not seem like a thoughtful way to approach the crisis of both our prison overcrowding and the drug epidemic that we are experiencing. Instead, I think we should be focusing on things that are going to actually lift people out of poverty and create a stable environment for them to thrive in, such as housing and food and electricity and strong schools and summer meals. When families have access to those resources, they are set up for success, and enhanced criminal penalties that are going to separate families are just going to be harmful to the state. So I am in opposition to LB 137, and I will remain in opposition to LB 137 for the duration of this debate, which I believe will be 4 hours. I see that there are other people in the queue, so do I have 10 minutes to open? For some reason, I was thinking I had 5. I'm a little slow on the uptake this morning.
Yes, 10 minutes.
How much time do I have left?
7:52 left.
Okay. Well, I might yield some time, if you would like it, to Senator Wayne in just a moment. Because I also think HHS is having an executive session right now. So if Senator Wayne would like, I'll yield the remainder of my time to him.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 7:28.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I know we're going to have a lot going on today, and there'll be people execing. This is kind of your first late night, so it'll be a little fun. But I just want to put the context in this regard. When it comes to families and victims having to seek justice, federal court is enough. But when it comes to prosecuting crimes, Senator Bosden's position that federal court isn't enough. So victims can only allow themselves to federal court to get justice when there is a crime or a state committed a wrongdoing to or negligently did something to children or families. But when it comes to prosecution, federal law isn't enough. We have to decide and be a little consistent here today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But unlike most filibusters, I don't want to stay on a motion to bracket. So I'm going to ask Senator Kavanaugh to pull her motion to bracket and motion to move, because there's going to be enough amendments that I'm going to take up 4 hours, but I want votes. Let's put people on record where their conscience really is when it comes to certain things. Like if we're going to attack this from all sides, as was stated on the floor by the introducer, then let's put votes on this. For example, let's put a vote on Senator Hunt's bill. Let's bring that back up. There's enough for a majority. Let's put it on this bill. Let's see if we stand by our words here and say we're going to attack it from all sides. Let's see if it's important enough to deal with this issue from all sides. So I also have another amendment on here that I want to get to, which is Senator Rabel's bill, dealing with the education in our schools about fentanyl and the poisoning that it does for Poison Week. Let's add that to this bill too, because we're dealing with the same topic, we're dealing with the same germaneness, and we're talking about tackling this issue from all sides. So let's tackle this issue from all sides. And I can tell you that we're not doing it with just this one bill. So let's just add everything together and let's have a comprehensive bill around tackling this drug, opioid, and fentanyl addiction from all sides. So that's what I want to see today. I want to see this bill on the floor be comprehensive for all sides, because the criminal part of it to me goes against the foundation of criminal law. And what I mean by the foundation of criminal law is if you commit a crime, you have to have the act or the knowing, intelligently knowing that you're committing the crime. There has to be what's called a mens rea. This eliminates mens rea. What it says is, if I am not just selling, see, this is being portrayed as going after the drug dealers. It's not that either. It's also going after people who are giving pills away, like friends, families, and others who might say, hey, your back hurts, here goes this pill, it'll help you out. They don't even have to know that it has fentanyl in it. Think about that. They do not even have to know that it has fentanyl in it, and they get an enhancement. So what I would like to see today is a comprehensive conversation over the next 4 hours about how we're going to have a comprehensive bill, because the introducer of this bill says we want to attack it from all sides. This is the opportunity for us to attack it from all sides. And we can attack it by making sure we're providing educational awareness. We can attack it by making sure that we have a front door policy to those who are addicted through needle exchange programs where we've seen this work. We can attack it from multiple sides, like marijuana in general. Let's have that conversation, because study after study are showing where marijuana is legal, the need for opioids drops tremendously. So let's have that conversation today, and let's put some votes out here. Let's put our mouth where our vote should be, or our vote where we've been saying our mouth is, and we'll find out if it's true or not. So that's going to be the conversation I would like to see today. People can stay in the motion to bracket. We can stay here all day, but I think there's some good amendments out there that we need to get to and we need to vote on. And that's what I'm planning on doing today, is getting to amendments and getting to vote. So what I would be willing to do is I'm willing to withdraw my amendments and move Senator Hunt's amendment all the way up to the top and see if we can get the same support we had for the override, see if we can get the same support that the introducer had for this bill. Let's see if it's still there, because we're not talking about an override vote. We're talking about our vote here to make sure we believe in this program and it moves forward. So those are the kind of things that I'm looking forward to today. I know revenue is going to be executing and other people are going to be executing. And randomly, I'll just call the House to make sure people are here, because it's usually the same people who are here on the floor. So we need to get everybody here. And I want to spend some little day talking about litigation and how it works, because Friday I heard a lot of talk about litigation and what people don't understand, that just because you file a lawsuit, there are plenty of checks and balances in a lawsuit, that it's not a runaway train. So I want to talk a little bit about that today too, to make sure people understand how litigation actually works, the number of procedures that are out there to defend a lawsuit and to actually prosecute a lawsuit or keep moving forward with the lawsuit, and this notion of summary judgment in civil litigation, where if you don't really have the facts in your favor, it'll be denied based off of a summary judgment. And so we'll walk through the stages of litigation so people can feel a little bit more comfortable about how litigation really works, and that it's not just around a courthouse. But there's two major themes that we want to talk about today, at least in this 4 hours, is if it's good enough that federal law is only good enough for these families to get justice and to deter other actions. According to the introducer of this bill, federal law is good enough for those families. State law does not have to happen. Then I would submit it should be the same for criminal prosecution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator Wayne. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the bracket motion. I am strongly opposed to LB 137 for all of the reasons Senator Wayne had mentioned. I mean, I oppose drug enhancements. I oppose any new crimes. And I oppose them not just because Senator Bosin introduced the bill. I oppose it because we created a sentencing task force last year to look at our sentencing in the state of Nebraska. And as a task force, it was my belief that we were not going to do anything that affected sentencing this year in the state of Nebraska, because we had this task force and we were going to go through a year of studying data, looking at our sentencing, getting in the community, going to talk to different stakeholders, and getting a better understanding of our criminal justice system and things around sentencing. So we weren't going to try to pass any type of sentencing related legislation, but we got LB 137 up today, and that is counter to my belief. And because of that, I really don't want to be on that task force anymore if this bill passed, and I'll probably step down. But back to this bill, I just don't understand the logic if last week the argument was on another bill that we don't need this bill. People could go file these suits in federal court. These crimes could be prosecuted in federal court. So if we're working under that logic, we don't need this bill at all, because it could be prosecuted by the feds if we're just relying. If we're going to rely on the feds in one instance, we should rely on the feds in all. We need to just be consistent. We should not pick and choose when to rely on the federal government, especially if we're not going to rely on the federal, if we're not going to allow for children in this state to go through state courts to seek some type of remedies, then it's just crazy to me, but it is what it is. Also, I just would tell y'all that this is going to have so many unintended consequences that you guys need to think back and look back at all those drug enhancements and crime enhancements that were put in place in the 90s around the crack epidemic. And what happened after that? You increased mass incarceration, our jails got filled, and it didn't solve anything. You just overly prosecuted people, filled up the jails, broke up homes, and made people who were not criminals criminals. That's what's going to happen. You're going to prosecute people who are dealing with addiction, which is a disease that need help. But instead of giving them help, they're going to end up in the pen with a felony and a drug enhancement, and they're not going to get the help inside, most likely, because when has the state actually provided any type of help? They just house people currently, and if
1 minute.
history continues, then that's just going to continue to happen. But I would ask you all to be cautious. I know it probably makes you feel good that you're going to support a bill to enhance a crime for fentanyl and other drugs, but there's a lot of unintended consequences that you need to consider. And I hope that we discuss all of those unintended consequences today before we take a vote, because there are many. And the prison that you guys voted to support last year is going to be, it's already going to be overcrowded, and it's going to be more overcrowded, and it's going to cost more dollars, and the state is going broke. So where are we going to pay for that, especially if we're raiding cash funds this year? So it's a lot of unintended consequences y'all should consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Bosson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Legislative Bill 137 was introduced on behalf of Taryn, AJ, Eugene, and countless others who have fallen victim to the fentanyl crisis in our country. I took over this bill when former Senator Suzanne Geist resigned in April 2023. As presented to the Judiciary Committee on March 23, 2023, several families testified to the tragic loss of their children who had unknowingly ingested fentanyl and died. The stories included young people who had not known that the drug that they took was laced with fentanyl. This bill was presented as an opportunity to hold people accountable for lacing drugs with fentanyl and other opioids when their actions result in death or serious bodily injury. Even since our last floor debate on this bill, February 22nd, law enforcement in Nebraska have seized more fentanyl and presumably saved more lives. On March 5th, 2024, Lancaster County deputies arrested 2 individuals from Lincoln with 537 pills containing 53.7 grams of fentanyl. Remember, colleagues, 2 milligrams of fentanyl is considered a lethal dose. So although my math isn't great, that's over 25,000 lethal doses of fentanyl in just one drug bust. The following day, March 6, 2024, the Lincoln-Lancaster County Narcotics Task Force arrested a dealer who allegedly was selling fentanyl daily since April 2023. According to the local news article, 13 to 14 times a week. The facts of that arrest are even more concerning when also taken into consideration is the fact that that law enforcement on their way to serve the search warrant in that case, the dealer flagged down law enforcement due to an overdose, a poisoning overdose, simultaneously occurring in his car. While I am grateful that he recognized the individual in his vehicle's urgent need for medical attention, including hospitalization, we cannot ignore the fact that drug dealers are killing citizens in this state. Colleagues, these are just 2 examples of situations that have occurred between our last debate and today. So there may be more, but doing nothing will not result in fewer. Currently, there are 26 states with penalties for drug-induced homicide, with Iowa passing their law just earlier this month. Please join me in supporting this bill and help Nebraska send a message that we will not continue to allow this reckless disregard for public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bosson. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reckless disregard for public safety. Safe needle exchange. That was a huge step in addressing public safety. It was the most impactful thing we could do for public safety in the opioid epidemic that we did do until we didn't. Reckless. That was reckless. This is optimizing care for people with opioid use disorder and mental health conditions from the National Institutes of Health. The research need. Among the millions of people with opioid use disorder, 27% have a serious mental illness. 64% have a mental illness, and approximately 11% to 26% have alcohol use disorder or another substance use disorder. Among those whose deaths are associated with opioid overdose, more than 80,000 in 2018, up to 30% may be due to suicide, and non-fatal overdoses involving opioids are associated with elevated suicide risk. Despite the clinical need for people with co-occurring opioid disorder and mental health conditions and/or suicide risk, access to evidence-based treatments remains low. About the program. The program supports innovative research to develop, optimize, and test approaches to improve delivery of treatments and services for people with co-occurring opioid use disorder, mental illness, and/or suicide risk. To expand the reach of effective strategies, this research addresses access, continuity, quality, equity, efficiency, value, and clinical outcomes of care. The program will leverage strong interdisciplinary research practice partnerships to diagnose and treat opioid use disorder and mental illness. Because many individuals who access mental health care quickly fall out of care and/or do not receive guideline concordant treatment, this research will develop screening methods to identify people with co-occurring conditions and assess the cost effectiveness and sustainability of the interventions and services in rural and urban settings and in areas with a shortage of health professionals. This research will also test the relative contributions of various care components for overall effectiveness in individuals with opioid use disorder and mental illness towards optimizing multi-component service delivery interventions. There's a lot of ways to approach a problem. And LB 137 takes the approach to continue the system involved intergenerational poverty, overcrowding of our prison system, not getting to the heart of any problem whatsoever, penalty, penalty, penalty. This is not an answer. This is not a fix. This is not a solution. This doesn't bring back anyone's dead child. It just perpetuates a different problem, a different epidemic, just prison overcrowding, lack of judicial reform. This is the opposite of a solution. This just creates new problems that continue to go unaddressed in this state. The entire time I have served in this legislature, I have seen my colleagues work for judicial reform
1 minute.
and be thwarted at making real changes that will impact the lives of those incarcerated individuals and their families. Further incarcerating people who have substance abuse disorders, that does nothing to address any problem. It brings no one back to life. It stops no one from using. It helps no one. Except for maybe a person who gets satisfaction out of somebody going to prison, but that still isn't going to bring a child or a family member or a friend back. So that doesn't really help you. This does not solve any problems. It just creates problems. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree that there is a drug problem, but it sounds like law enforcement's doing a pretty good job of taking down drug dealers. My concern about this bill is the unintended consequences of two friends, and they were just trying to help a friend out with some back pain or some knee pain and didn't think of the actual consequences when they gave him an oxy that he didn't even know was laced. He took it for face value, thought it was a oxy that was regular, and friend got hurt playing football or basketball that weekend and handed it to somebody, and now they have an enhanced penalty. I have some huge concerns about that. But nevertheless, there's going to be some good votes today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And Senator Bosin yield to a question?
Senator Bosin, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
How would your bill, if passed, change the two scenarios you laid out where the police stopped drug dealers?
Are you talking about in my opening just now?
Yes.
The two arrests?
Yes.
Well, it wouldn't apply to either of those unless someone died as a result of those drug deals.
So it doesn't apply at either one. Okay. So the purpose of that was just showing how big the opioid problem is in Nebraska?
No, the problem is to show how, well, that, yes, to short answer, but I think the argument that I would respectfully make is that while those individuals are still dealing those drugs, that there is the potential for someone to take those drugs in an unprescribed manner and as a result either lose their life or be seriously injured.
And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you on Friday. Why is federal law not enough in this situation?
So it's my understanding and it's my opinion that this is a national movement that states are filing or are, changing their statutes to include the ability to prosecute these in state courts. I certainly understand your disagreement with that and certainly understand your argument. It's my position that as it stands right now, the federal government is only pursuing criminal charges in federal court in those cases when it was their law enforcement divisions that did the investigation.
So you don't feel there's an adequate remedy in federal law?
I think that, I don't know that I would actually be able to disagree with that. I think it's a good remedy. I think this is a better option for the state of Nebraska to be able to pursue these charges in state court.
Why is state court so important?
Well, my position on it is that our local law enforcement officers who are investigating these crimes can then bring them to the local, state, county attorneys and attorney generals for purposes of prosecution.
What's the benefit of a state court, though?
I don't know how to answer your question differently than I have.
Well, you said that it's better in state court. You didn't use the word better, but alluded to it. So I'm just, it's not a gotcha. I'm asking you why state over federal.
And my answer is the same, that if the federal courts are not pursuing these cases or don't feel as though they can or are or should or whatever the case may be, if the end result is that the U.S. Attorney's Office or whoever it is only pursuing these crimes in cases where the FBI or federal law enforcement agencies have done the criminal investigation, then we are doing ourselves a disservice by having our local law enforcement agencies not be able to seek the same level of justice for Nebraskans. And we may just have to agree to disagree on that, but that's what I'm.
I don't think there's a disagreement there. It's about justice. And how do you define justice?
Whew. I mean, that's a whole lot of different ways one can define that. I can come up with something concise and probably better when I've had some time to reflect on it, but I think justice is defined in a lot of different ways depending on your perspective.
Time.
Thank you. The next question I'll ask you on my next time around is, what do you have against the felony murder rule? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator Boston. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe we're doing ourselves a disservice by now not allowing children and families to be able to seek justice in state court when their children are harmed in our schools. But that's another bill for another day, but I think it's important to kind of mention because it's part of this conversation. Also, on the topic of fentanyl and fentanyl overdoses, it's not lost on me, and it was just reminded to me that part of the spike in fentanyl-related overdoses or cases, some of it originated out of our state patrol's evidence office. So that's something we should also consider as well. A lot of it came out of the state patrol's evidence. However that was able to happen, it happened, but it should be mentioned. But back to this topic about LB 137, why are we enhancing penalties when we created a sentencing task force? And this is why I don't like being placed on these task force. And I'm either getting off this task force, and if there's other task force created in the future while I'm here, I'm probably not getting on for reasons that I try to go in with a lot of optimism, like, yeah, because if you don't show up, they'll say you didn't try to engage, so you kind of caught in a catch-22. But you try to go in trying to be optimistic that, okay, we're going to create a sentencing task force. We're going to look at the laws that affect sentencing on both sides of the spectrums and try to figure out what's wrong, what needs to be improved, and all those type of things. But then we're prioritizing LB 137, and there are no bills prioritized to deal with changing our sentencing in the state, primarily because we were working under the premise that we had this task force. We were going to go through this process, evaluate data again after we evaluated data a million times already, but we're going to evaluate data again, do some community engagement, all these type of things. Then we're going to come back in 25 and try to get some things passed that might or should improve our criminal justice system and our sentencing. I was like, all right, well, whatever, let's try to figure it out. But then we get LB 137 prioritized, and again, my spidey sense is raised, and it's like, okay, who is acting in good faith around here? And I bring this up because we passed LB 50 last year, and it didn't go as far as, I would like, because I like things to go super far, and, I don't always get what I want, but it was a good step in the right direction. And then you get people asking for opinions, and then it's
1 minute.
Append as unconstitutional. Now it's in the courts. Then you got people writing me all the time and asking questions about what is the status of LB 50, how does it affect me, all these type of things. But I don't feel like people acted in good faith when we passed LB 50 last year, and I don't believe the same thing is happening with LB 137 because we created a sentencing task force to study laws that affected sentencing, and it was, maybe I misunderstood the conversation. I didn't think that anybody was going to try to do any type of laws that affected sentencing this year, because we were going through the sentencing task force to better understand our policies, to make better policies for the future. That is annoying, and maybe I misread the conversation, so I could be wrong, but even so, I
Time.
still oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Bosman yield to a question?
Senator Boston, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Bosman. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd asked you, but gave you a heads up before. Can you talk to me about your position on the felony murder rule and the good and the bad about it?
So I guess talk to you about the felony murder rule, which am I correct? You're talking about 28305, which is manslaughter.
Correct.
So manslaughter is defined as when a person commits manslaughter if he or she kills another without malice upon a sudden quarrel or causes the death of another unintentionally while in the commission of an unlawful act. And it then categorizes it as a Class 2A felony.
Do you believe in the felony murder rule?
Do I believe in the felony murder rule?
Yeah. Do you think it's a good policy? And it's not a trick question. I'm asking about mens rea, because your bill doesn't have mens rea, and I want to know if you believe the same thing in felony murder rule.
Well, those are two different questions, but as to your first question, which is, do I believe in the felony manslaughter rule?
Do you think it's a good policy is the question?
I've never actually tried a manslaughter case, so I don't have personal experience trying those, but I guess I have no reason to think it's bad policy unless you think I'm missing something.
No, I'm just saying, no, because your bill also doesn't have a mens rea element to it as far as knowingly that you had fentanyl in it. And I'll yield you the rest of my time to tell us more about your bill.
Really? So I guess my impression is that you are questioning the, I guess, am I yielded the time?
You yielded 3 minutes.
Thank you. Whether or not manslaughter is a worthy penalty to keep in the books, and my position on that is yes. I think that the question that Senator Wayne has actually refers to whether or not I think that penalty is sufficient, and in some way, then if so, why do we need the bill that I've brought before you at 137? But I don't know that, so I will not assume things that I don't know on this particular case, and I will end it there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator Boston. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you yielded 4 minutes and 52 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator John Cavanaugh yield to a question?
Senator John Cavanaugh, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator John Cavanaugh, it was kind of alluded that federal cases aren't being picked up if they're being investigated by local law enforcement. Do you have the same belief that?
Well, yeah, so I heard that referenced. It's not been my experience, and thank you for the question, Senator Wayne. I actually recall a case that you and I had co-defendants on that we did a motion to suppress, and distinctly remember the law enforcement involved in that case was entirely local. And then as a result of what the circumstances were, that was a case that was picked up by the feds. And I recall this because as a county level public defender, I was no longer on the case once the case goes federal. And so that was one very specific example where I recall that the federal law enforcement picked up a case because of the seriousness of the offense or the level of the charge, the amount of drugs involved in guns, things like that, that the federal law enforcement decided to pick that case up. So I think that there's maybe some confusion about how that works out, but it really, as long as there's a federal charge that is covered by the conduct, the federal law enforcement, the U.S. Attorney's Office is within their ability to pick up those cases and prosecute them if they see fit, and often does happen.
Thank you. Will Senator Boslin yield to a question?
Senator Boston, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Boslin, you said that 26 states have passed similar laws. Do you have any data from journals or anywhere that shows that since that law has been passed, the number of arrests for fentanyl or the number of deaths have declined in those states?
I can look into that and get you some information on it. Are there states you're looking for specifically, or just a general overall?
Well, it's easy to get on the mic and say 26 other states do this, but we don't talk about the impact. Because if your belief is this is a way to stop fentanyl, or at least slow it down or put a dent in this problem, then I would hope that if we're quoting 26 other states, that we have some data to back that those states have lowered their fentanyl problem or put a dent in their fentanyl problem. Otherwise, there's no need for this bill. So is there any data to support that?
Okay, so I can look for information to back that claim up, if that is what you're asking me to do.
Yeah, and I think it's good for the body to know. So maybe we should pass over this until we get that data, if the speaker would allow so, because I think that's critical if we're going to pass laws. And thank you, Senator Boslin. If we're going to pass laws on this floor and we're going to compare them to other states, and we do it all the time with taxes, right? So every year we hear we have to be competitive with the 4 states around us, and you can point to, and they always show data that says when Iowa lowered its tax rate to 3.6%. They saw an increase of X number of GDP or X number of whatever. When we hear about LB 77 is a great example. When it was passed in other states, we saw an uptick in criminal violence and shootings. Like, all this data was out here. And so what I'm saying to this body is, if 26 states have done it, let's see if it's worked or not. And if it has, that's a good conversation, because what we have seen is that from the needle exchange program, states that have done it have put a dent. Now, Senator Hansen has some data showing it going up, skyrocketing, but it also shows states who just recently done it have slowed the progress or put dents in it. So I think data is important, and we should have that conversation if we're going to say we're trying to do what other states are doing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne, Senator John McCavan, and Senator Boston. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak, and this is your 3rd time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since we're on a conversation of data, some other data that I think we should also pull is the racial impact in those other states once those laws have passed. How has the passage of those laws affected different groups in those states across racial demographic lines? Let's pull that graphic and let's see if there was negative impacts on different groups in those 26 other states. That would be interesting to see. I wish we would have racial impact statements on our bills, but this body doesn't want to pass that bill. But if we're going to pull data, let's pull data on the racial impact of drug enhancements, especially enhancements around fentanyl. So let's pull that data too. We should also look no further than previous enhancements of crimes from this body, who, from reports from UNO, have said this body, this legislature, is to blame for our prison problem, because we like to pass bills to feel good and enhance penalties and not think about the impact that it's going to have, not that year or the next year, but for generations or for decades. And then we end up with a system that is severely overcrowded. You guys vote to spend $350 million on a prison because people in this body before I was here decided to enhance penalties. So, and that's not even including the operational cost of the prison. That's $350 million, not including operations. So it could be $500,000, $500 million, I mean. And then also, what are we gonna do about the Nebraska State Penitentiary, which probably won't be closed? I brought a bill to demolish it, and nobody seems to think the whole complex should be demolished because there are bills that should be saved. But for about 2 to 3 years, people went around this place and the other places and spoke to the media and said, the Nebraska State Penitentiary is in such disarray that we need a replacement prison, and we need $350 million to do it, in which people voted to support. So if that's the case, I think it all should be demolished, but that's neither here or there. But we should also think about the racial impact of drug enhancement and crime enhancements. You know what? I would guarantee that all these crime enhancements have negatively impacted minority groups in this state. I would guarantee it. This will negatively impact people that look like me, people that look like Senator Vargas, Senator Wayne, Senator Sanders, Senator Brewer. It will negatively impact people. That is something that you should think about when you pass these bills, because as much as we want to say there's equal justice in the law, that is not true. And it's not done that way. People are negatively impacted by drug enhancements, especially people who come from impoverished communities, because they don't have the resources to fight these cases like other groups in this state. And that is something you should think about when you try to pass laws like this. I told you, we should think about all unintended consequences of this law, and the racial impact is one of them. So when you pull data on the impact in other states, I hope you're pulling the racial impact and how many people across racial lines went to prison because of those drug enhancements. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is the bracket motion to April 11th, just before tax day. And I've got other motions filed, but I know that there are amendments pending, so I thought that we should probably get to some of those amendments because maybe they will improve this bill. Or maybe they won't, but I don't have any inherent opposition to amendments. So I figured if the bill's going to pass, may as well let us get to those amendments. Maybe it's not going to pass, but you know, whatever happens, I want it to be the best version possible. So I am going to have us go to a vote on this because maybe everybody will want to bracket it. Let's find out. I am sort of intermittently engaging in this debate while also working on a different research project that is going to be part of floor debate, I think, later this week. So I've got my brain kind of in two different areas. I've been interested in the debate between Senator Bosin and Senator Wayne this morning about penalties in federal court versus state court. Last week, there was a very interesting, on Friday, conversation on the floor about bills that are being held in judiciary. And there was a pretty robust debate around a specific bill. I can't remember what the bill number was, but it's a bill that's been held in judiciary because it doesn't have the votes to get out, because colleagues stated that they didn't think that families should be able to sue in state court if their child is physically abused sexually abused by an educator or someone employed by the education community, they should not be able to sue in state court, only federal court. But we want to have enhanced penalties for opioid use in state court, and federal court isn't good enough. So federal court is good enough for abused children, but it isn't good enough for people with substance use disorders. Noted. Yeah, with that, I guess we can go to a vote.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. The question before the body is a vote on the bracket motion. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted that wish to? Mr. Clerk, please record.
Three ayes, 23 nays on the motion to bracket the bill, Mr. President.
The motion is not adopted. Mr. Clerk, for next item.
Okay. Mr. President, the next amendment offered by Senator Wayne, AM 2675. Mr. President, Senator Bosman would move to amend with Floor Amendment 231, but I have a note that she wishes to withdraw and substitute AM 2828.
Senator Wayne has objected to withdraw and substitute. Senator Boston, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move to withdraw and substitute, and I would move to withdraw and substitute Floor Amendment 231 with AM 2828.
Senator Boston, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Okay, thank you, colleagues and Mr. President. This is my amendment that would add LB 892, which was filed, which is the Nebraska Uniform Controlled Substance Act, to bring and conform the state controlled substance schedule to the federal controlled substances schedule. Every time the federal government updates their controlled substance schedule, the state of Nebraska updates their schedule with a bill the following session. This is the reason that I introduced and brought this bill. It would make updates to the Schedule 1, Schedule 3, and Schedule 4 controlled substances. For clarification, controlled substances in Schedule 1 have no currently accepted medical use in the United States and a high potential for abuse. Schedules 2, 3, and 4 also have potentials for abuse. So this bill allows the outlawing of a synthetic opioid substance and 3 other drugs. These are non-FDA approved drugs, which include, quote, designer or, quote, street drugs that have no medicinal use. Xylazine was added to the Schedule 3 update. It is not intended for human use, but veterinarians do use it on animals, so this was an amendment that was brought while it was in committee. The Schedule 4 update will remove fenfluramine from the Schedule 4 list. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this amendment onto the bill. This was voted out of committee, but didn't have a priority, so I'm asking to add it because it does open the same section of statute, hoping that we will green light floor amendment 231. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bosson. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. For colleagues who are wondering what's going on procedurally, if somebody moves to substitute, you can object and it becomes a debatable motion on the floor. I kind of disagree with that, but that's nevertheless. But understand, just because you don't substitute, if you vote no on this, the motion is still there. So I don't know why we just didn't withdraw this, but it gives me 3 more times to speak. So I'll use all 3 of my times to speak. So it actually helps me. So if anybody wants to punch in the queue and give me time, then we'll just take more time on their own motion, which is fine by me. So the actual motion is to withdraw and substitute. That's what we're going to be voting on, whether to withdraw and substitute. Then after this vote, I'm going to object on germaneness to the next one. And the chair will probably rule against my germaneness. Then I'm going to object to overrule the chair. Then the question before the speaker becomes, is this motion and the objection to germaneness motion to overrule the chair, is that 4 hours going to keep counting or not? Because we've had different speakers do different things. So we'll have to figure out if that is part of the 4 hours or not, because some people say it's not because it's a procedural. It isn't about the actual bill itself. It's about overruling the chair. So we'll see what the speaker decides on that issue too. But nevertheless, what we're talking about here on this bill, and actually this one right here, is a federal update. Now understand, here comes the real interesting part. Once you open up this statute and you add this other statute, that opens up everything I want to do for marijuana. So you need to think hard about if you want to make this germaneness on this LB 892, because we might have a lot of marijuana votes today. And those poll real good, real well, excellent in many of the jurisdictions people may be running in, especially medical cannabis. Man, does that poll extremely well. And so if we're going to be comprehensive, today we're going to have a lot of comprehensive votes on where people are. My goal is to, the reason I withdrew my motions is because I want to get to Hunt's motion. And Hunt's amendment, if it gets on, I'm off. Everybody moves, the bill moves. If it doesn't, we'll just keep talking, I guess, and burn some time. But we're going to have some real conversation about mens rea and if you knowingly have to have anything. So the mother or father who gives their child a pill for their back, they said, hey, we'll take you to the doctor, but go ahead and take this, and something happens, could be charged. We're going to spend $42,000 a year. I wonder if Senator John Kavanaugh remembers, and I'm going to say it out loud, so I'll ask you next time on the mic. If him or any other person recalls the study that was done about how our prisons upticked in the first place, and it was laws like this, where we had adequate laws at the federal level, but Nebraska wanted to be tough on crime, and we took a gun charge that the feds were picking up. Now, don't get me wrong. For people to say that the feds aren't picking up is just not true, because there's 2 people who were just charged in Lincoln on the federal level for this exact issue. But nevertheless, the story being told on the mic is that if it's strictly federal law enforcement, that's the only time they prosecute, which isn't true. But nevertheless, we'll deal with the issue. But we had a handgun law where we put a mandatory minimum at the state level.
1 minute.
And when we did it at the state level, that gave the excuse for the feds to say, hey, we don't have to prosecute this no more. We're going to let state prosecute. And that's what happened. all the people who are doing a mandatory minimum of 3 years for felon in possession of a gun, and that's usually their only charge, and they're doing a mandatory minimum, that's because we passed a law because we wanted to be tough on crime, even though the feds were picking up that exact crime and damn near getting the exact, if not worse, as far as sentencing for the defendant. So we would say better for the state because they were being sentenced longer. But we wanted to put a mandatory minimum of 3, and we shifted tons of costs to ourselves by not letting the feds pick up. But that's okay. We can increase the cost to the state for that, but we cannot, Lord God forbid, we help out victims. Thank you, Mr.
You are
President.
next in the queue, so you're recognized to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Senator John Kavanaugh yield to a question?
Will Senator John Kavanaugh yield to a question?
Yes,
You heard the story that I just said about the change in the gun laws.
I did.
Did you remember reading that?
I do.
And was how I said that, my recollection, somewhat correct, or it could be wrong?
I think, yeah, I didn't have any problems with your recollection. The one thing I would add to it is they interviewed senators who were instrumental in passing that bill, and they expressed their regrets and concern about how they pushed for and supported that bill and wish if they had it to do over again, wouldn't have done that.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Sure. So in exec committee, I heard a lot from senators about the increased cost if LB 325 passed. It might open the floodgates, and even though prior from 5 years ago, it was plaintiffs' attorneys thought it was the law. Nevertheless, the concern of cost. But when it comes to prosecuting people, come hell or high water, we don't care about cost. Even though we can point to one bill that was passed that significantly added about 1,000 people to our prison system, and they're what you consider the short timers. They typically do a mandatory minimum of just 3. So they're stuck there for 3 and they can't get good time because it's a mandatory minimum. Then they jam out and with no services, and then we wonder why we have this problem. But we don't, doesn't bother us. When it comes to prosecution and locking up people, it doesn't matter that it's going to cost my kids a lot more money because we're going to have to build 2 or 3 prisons, rather than letting the feds continue to pick up this. But when it comes, again, let me repeat this narrative here. When it comes to victims of crimes or negligent acts by the state, or negligent acts because the state didn't stop something that they knew about, federal court is enough. Too bad victims, too bad young children, too bad our most vulnerable. But state law, we should use it to prosecute, even though we don't need to, because we want to be tough on crime. And the worst part about it is no data has been presented that this will stop crime. Because here is the dirty secret nobody wants to talk about. They can charge this right now underneath a manslaughter charge. They can charge this crime right now under a manslaughter charge. It just requires a little bit more burden of proof, which means they have to have real mens rea. That is the problem. They can charge this right now as a manslaughter charge. And I would dare somebody to get up on the mic and say they can't. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to start stacking charges, manslaughter. Now we're going to do this charge too. So we can stack charges to put people away for longer at a longer cost to us. And that is the truth. If you don't believe me, ask Senator Bosin, ask Senator Holcroft, ask Senator Eibach, ask Senator McKinney, ask Senator Kay, ask Senator DeBoer, ask Senator Blood, who were all in the hearing. Make sure I got everybody, who were all in the hearing, who said multiple times this can currently be prosecuted underneath manslaughter. Somebody just asked the question, if it can currently be done, why are we adding more laws to the books? Why? Because we want to make it easier to prosecute somebody without a dent in actually solving the problem. Without a dent in actually solving the problem.
1 minute.
This is all smoke and mirrors. to make us feel good, tough on crime, but I'm going to hammer home every day when this bill passes, we are tough on crime, but we are soft when it comes to victims getting justice. Soft. We're worried about the state's budget when it comes to the little kid who got sexually assaulted, but for the prisoner, we don't matter how much we got to spend. There goes your mailer. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Holcroft would like to recognize 80 fourth grade students at the Gretna Elementary School in Gretna, Nebraska, located in the North Balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska State Legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. When we went to a vote last time, I didn't do a call of the House because it was my understanding that the Revenue Committee was in an executive session, but apparently they were not in an executive session. They were having a closed door meeting to keep the press out, which I think is really unfortunate, especially at this point in the session where most of us don't have any idea what's going on in revenue. This is not the way transparent government should function. So I won't make that mistake again because I thought you were doing the work in a proper way, but I guess from now on I should call the House because you shouldn't be meeting in secret or closed doors. Revenue Committee. There you go. Yes. I appreciate Senator Wayne's conversation on this substituted amendment. I will say, Senator Wayne, if this opens up marijuana statute to be attached to this bill, I may be in favor of that. I would like to see us decriminalize marijuana in this state. I know that it's wildly popular and that it is going to be on the ballot, but we could save that community of advocates a lot of time if we just pass something here in the legislature. I know that there is an amazing advocate, parent advocate who has been leading this charge for several years because medicinal marijuana usage would help her son with his seizures. And so let's give her back that time with her son. He can have access to the care that he needs. She can spend time with him instead of having to focus on this ballot initiative. So yeah, I don't know. You may have talked me into it, Senator Wayne. That's it. I'm going to listen to the rest of this debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Holcroft yield to a question?
Senator Holcroft, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Holcroft. This is your priority bill?
Yes, it is.
Why did you decide to prioritize this?
Okay, so this bill dates back quite a few years, actually. I think it was part of the criminal justice bill in the last legislature. And then when it came to our legislature, Senator Geist took it up. Unfortunately, she could not carry it through to fruition because she resigned, and Senator Boslin took it up. And then it was included in the criminal justice package LB 50 as part of that effort. And it was pulled at the last minute as part of the negotiation for LB 50. So I felt an obligation primarily to the county attorneys to prioritize that bill and bring it into this session.
Did the county attorneys present any data to you that showed that in states where similar laws like this have passed, that fentanyl-related overdoses decreased?
No, they did not.
Did they present any data that showed the racial impact where these laws have passed?
No, they did not. The reason I stayed with the priority was really because of the history of the bill with Senator Geist bringing it forward, Senator Boslin using it, and it being included in LB 50 initially.
So is there any data that if this law passes this year, that there will be a decrease in fentanyl-related overdoses in the state of Nebraska?
I do not have that data.
All right, thank you. Again, we need to think about unintended consequences of laws like this, and we need to think about every angle. I'm not even standing up saying I'm right. I'm saying we need to look at every angle of every law that we pass, especially when we have clear examples of crime enhancements that skyrocketed our prison population. And now we have an overcrowding situation. You're building a new prison that is going to be overcrowded day one. Who has the data that shows if this law passes, what is the potential increase of the prison population? Maybe I'll probably go look at the fiscal note. Maybe it's in there somewhere. But what is that potential impact? We need to think about that, because what that would tell me is either we're going to expand the already $350 million prison, which means it's going to be more than $500 million, and then we don't include operations, or that means there's been conversations that NSP is going to stay open. If the projections of this bill potentially means there will be an increase in prison, in the amount of people going to jail potentially, then I think we should think about that, because that is a cost to taxpayers that needs to be discussed. I think people who support this bill should also tell taxpayers that means you're going to have to foot the bill for increased beds in our prisons. I support this bill, which means you're going to be paying for more beds in our prisons. Say that to the taxpayers as well. Don't just say, I want to deter crime. Say, I also support this bill, which means you're going to pay for more prison beds, and that you're going to potentially pay for 2 prisons. And the new prison that we're building is not a replacement, it's an additional prison. Say that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Boslin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to take some time to talk about the significance of the fentanyl crisis that our country is dealing with. A drug toxicity, this is all information from the organization called Drug-Induced Homicide, and they are working to implement drug-induced homicide penalties in each state. That's where I found a lot of the information on which states have this penalty and which states do not. And that information is changing every day, and I'll talk about that also. But one of the things that this website explains is that a drug toxicity death occurs nearly every 7 minutes in America. So if you think about the last 2 minutes of Senator McKinney's speech, by the time I'm done, another person will have passed. Illicit drugs are now the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45. Man-made illicit fentanyl is involved in the majority of those deaths, which now surpass car accidents, firearms, suicide, and illness. The bulk of illicit fentanyl is manufactured in China and Mexico and then illegally brought into the United States. It is highly addictive, highly lethal, and very cheap to manufacture. Drug dealers are selling counterfeit pills to mimic legitimate pharmaceutical medications such as Xanax, Percocet, and oxycodone. Instead, they contain nothing but useless filler and illicit fentanyl, which is up to 100 times stronger than morphine. They are adding fentanyl to common, far less lethal street drugs such as cocaine, methamphetamine, and others. This despicable act by cartels and drug dealers is being done solely for financial gain with absolute disregard for human life. While China and drug cartels in Mexico are a major part of the illicit drug supply chain, so are the drug dealers operating in Nebraska. Some say that arresting drug dealers does not have an impact on drug deaths. You've heard that from several of my colleagues today. We're going to arrest these drug dealers, but that's not going to bring people back to life. Nope, it won't. How sad. But while it won't bring the loved ones back, it might just save your loved ones. Because dealing in death is criminal and it warrants justice. The reality is, according to the website, that only 1% of all drug deaths result in the conviction of a drug dealer. So it's talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're talking about how no one can use this, it won't be able to be used, but oh, it's going to totally pack our prisons. We're going to need 6 prisons. I mean, we might need 10. I don't know. But the reality here is this will remain a difficult charge for prosecutors to prove. But when they can prove it, they should. Until drug dealers are held accountable, deaths will continue and drug dealers will continue getting away with murder. I also reviewed, chasing the rabbit on this, some information from 2 of the mothers of victims of overdose drug deaths. And what was interesting for me was their absolute adamant refusal to call this an overdose, and instead refer to this for what it really is, which is a poisoning. Because if we tell someone we're selling them a Percocet, as illegal as that is, and as disappointing as that is that someone is using drugs illegally, the reality is—
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reality is you are not being overdosed on the thing you thought you were taking. You're being poisoned with something else that is cheap to make and quick to get an addiction to. And that's flashy for drug dealers. And we are sitting here today and fighting this policy tooth and nail. I mean, we have pulled a lot of stops today, friends, because we're mad about something else. And I think it's unfortunate for those family members who came here and testified, who brought us a real problem, and we have the opportunity to present a solution to help law enforcement be able to hold those accountable who poison and kill our citizens because of something completely unrelated to that fact. Please vote in favor of the substitution for
Time.
AM. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boston. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am sitting off to the side here listening, trying to wrap my head around all the legalese and terminology with this bill, and I think I got a pretty good handle on it. Been in communication with Senator Boston and others about the bill, trying to wrap my head around it and maybe the effect that would have, not just in my district, but on the state of Nebraska, and listen to what Senator McKinney's been saying as well, and Senator Wayne. I did like to just have a few comments on the amendment that she's introducing, because this is a very similar amendment that I had, or a bill that I introduced about, I believe, 3 years ago, that had to do with updating the controlled substance list. I believe the one that I had also involved fentanyl, a certain type of fentanyl. And then I think Senator Geist also introduced something very similar last year. Every year we have to introduce, we don't have to, but every year or two, we look at updating the controlled substance list. As new drugs get introduced on the streets or to the citizens of Nebraska, we have to make sure that law enforcement is able to stay ahead of all the new formulations that are coming out of certain drugs. So I encourage all my colleagues to vote for the underlying amendment. I am voting so far for LB 137. I do like the bill. It makes sense to me. I will maybe have some more questions on the microphone of Senator Bosden to make sure I can clarify 137 for myself. But the amendment, I believe, right now includes, I think, one of the drugs that we're looking to update, which I'm always fascinated by the new kinds of drugs that people find to use. And so I believe on the amendment involves, I think, a horse tranquilizer or an elephant tranquilizer. So I guess people now in the state of Nebraska are using elephant tranquilizers. I never thought I'd see that one. So I don't know how you'd even survive that. But now I believe that is one of the formulations or drugs that is now being added with the amendment. And so, along with other ones that are being included, that's why I'm in favor of the amendment. I always like to make sure that we can kind of do our due diligence and stay ahead of things. With the underlying bill, from my understanding, and maybe Senator Wayne or Senator Boslin can clarify it later, I think we are already able to stack penalties. Maybe I can ask Senator Boslin to yield to a question.
Senator Boston, will you yield to a question?
Sure.
So just to clarify, and maybe you can expound on this a little bit, are we talking about stacking penalties so much as we are enhancing penalties?
We are talking about enhancing a penalty.
Okay, so judges right now currently can stack penalties. This doesn't really affect that very much at all.
I guess I'm not, you're talking about concurrent versus consecutive. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, judges can run something concurrent, which means at the same time. So if you're sentenced on count 1 for 10 and count 2 for 10, you're running both 1 and 2 counts at the same time. So it's a 0 to 10. But you can also run them consecutively, which would mean that you would run 10 years on count 1 and then you would begin 10 years on count 2.
Okay.
This penalty would enhance the charge to the next higher level of penalty up to a 1C. So it wouldn't be 2 separate counts. It would be 1 charge of delivery resulting or possession of a controlled substance resulting in the death of another, and it would then raise it 1 level of penalty. So, for example, if it's possession of a controlled substance is a class 4 felony, so this would make it a class 3 felony, 3A, excuse me. I haven't practiced since a lot of these changed, so I don't want to misspeak, but it would raise it 1 level for the crime.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. I appreciate that. And I'll continue to listen to the debate as we go along here. I encourage all my colleagues to just saying to make sure we make good informed decisions about the bill, even though sometimes it's difficult for some of us to maybe understand because of all legal terminology and the effects that might have in another branch of government. So I'm going to sit here and continue to listen. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen and Senator Boston. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. And I'm trying to get out of the queue, but every time I'm getting out of the queue to get to votes, there's things said on the mic that are obviously missing some facts or intentionally or otherwise or misleading. So Senator Hansen, stacking of the charges is done at the prosecutor level. So, but what the conversation you had didn't have really to do with stacking of the charges. Underneath the fact pattern where this bill is trying to get to, that fact pattern could include a manslaughter charge, this new charge, and possession with intent to distribute. 3 different charges, including a manslaughter and this enhancement. So, and you can get other charges stacked on that. But the issue of the manslaughter in this case, or the enhancement is, those can be stacked. Now, what was conveniently left out is if you have a mandatory minimum, there is no good time. So you have to run that consecutively if you have a mandatory minimum. You can't run it. So if you have a gun charge and an additional charge, your gun charge sentence has to run that mandatory minimum of 3 first. So it's a lot more complicated than just the scenario that was laid out. But nevertheless, I'm going to get out the queue. We're going to get to some votes. And go from there, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne, and that was your 3rd time. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I found the fiscal note on LB 137 and looking at the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services response. It's their explanation of their estimate. It says LB 137 provides for a penalty enhancement for a controlled substance violation resulting in serious bodily injury or death. This bill could increase the length of stay of persons in prison, thereby increasing the overall prison population. The specific amount of impact is indeterminable. As of December 22, 2022, the average daily population was 147% of design capacity, which means the prisons are overcrowded, if you didn't know. The fiscal year 22 per diem cost was $28.38 for each incarcerated individual, or $10,358.63 per year. So what this is saying is there's potentially an overcrowded system will be more overcrowded if we pass this bill. So just know, in your support for LB 137, you're supporting more increasing the overcrowding problem in our prisons, which means if you're here, because some people won't be here, but some people will be, you're going to have to foot the bill to expand the new prison or keep NSP operating. That is what you're going to do when you vote yes on this bill. So think about all the unintended consequences when you vote for this bill. Just think about it. There is no data that has been presented on this floor on general file or today that speaks to laws similar to this in other states being passed, decreasing deaths, decreasing fentanyl-related deaths. There's no data that's been presented. There's no data talking about positive impacts of laws like this. Maybe just more people going to jail, but no positive impacts on laws like this actually having the intent that I guess having an impact that this is intended to have. So why would you vote yes on this? There's no data being presented. There's no examples of positive impacts of these laws in other states. And on top of that, it's going to have negative racial impacts. And also, additionally, you're going to increase the overcrowding problem in our state. Tell the taxpayers that you're voting to make them pay for an expanded new prison, and you're voting to potentially keep the Nebraska State Penitentiary open, because that's what you're going to do. That's what laws like this do. They increase the prison population. They don't solve crime. Police don't even solve crime. Crime happens and they respond to it. And the comments that this is not being prosecuted is not true either, because I know people that I grew up with who are in federal prison now that because of fentanyl, and they got sentenced late last year. So it's being prosecuted, and there's other people going to jail that I know as well because of fentanyl. So it's being prosecuted. So again, think about all the unintended consequences of laws like this, and tell your constituents that you're voting to expand the new prison and keep NSP open, because that's what laws like this will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Lowe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, President Dorn. As we stand here and sit here today on this beautiful, cool day out, we're discussing LB 137, and I'm standing in favor of that. And I'm still not sure about FA 231 and why we have to get rid of the comma. But so I'm just questioning that. But at this point in time, as Venezuela releases their prisoners out of their prisons and empties their prisons to send them north to America, I question why we don't stop them at the border. That and the fentanyl that's coming across at the same time. That seems to be our problem right now, is all this fentanyl that's crossing our border that is originating most likely in China and destroying our country from within. They don't need to spend all that money on military when we destroy our own children. So I stand with LB 137 and creating stronger penalties for those that are distributing this drug or other drugs. With that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Boson if she would take it.
Senator Boson, you yielded 325.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Lowe. So to pick back up where I left off, still on the drug-induced homicide information that's put out. Fentanyl is the single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. Think about that. The single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. Americans are dying every 5 minutes from a drug death. Children under 14 are dying from fentanyl poisoning faster than any other age group. Children under 14 are dying faster. Distributors are reaching youth through social media apps to make it effortless to obtain dangerous drugs. Teaching prevention is essential to saving lives, and everyone should know about the dangers of illicit fentanyl. The goal here is to spare families from the dangers and the devastation of fentanyl poisoning. Do not think that your family is the exception and regret waiting until it's too late. That's one of the flyers that they put out. I also found an article recently stated March 4th of 2024 from an Iowa newspaper. Iowa House passes extreme penalty for fentanyl deaths. House File 2576 passed by a vote of 86 to 12. 86 to 12, which would make a person who unlawfully supplies another individual with fentanyl or fentanyl-related substances eligible for a first-degree murder charge if the consumption results in death. This would carry a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. That's Iowa's new law. Their goal, as quoted by the senator who brought the bill, representative who brought the bill, Ann Meyer out of Fort Dodge, all roads lead to Fort Dodge. My mom is from Fort Dodge. It is true. All roads do lead to Fort Dodge. Thank you, Mr. President. Raising penalties will disincentivize drug traffickers who are currently operating in our state. Meyer said that the high bar of punishment is necessary to prevent further fentanyl overdose deaths and to deter traffickers from selling the drug in Iowa. This is an extreme punishment because we have an extreme problem in Iowa. And I'm here to fight for those parents, for those family members of people that are getting swept up and for some reason taking a counterfeit pill, which are plentiful in our state right now. And we need an extreme solution. And I agree with Representative Ann Meyer of Iowa on that particular fact for sure.
Thank you, Senator Lowe and Senator Boson. Senator Ibaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just, because I serve on judiciary and this bill came last year, I was looking over my notes this morning thinking, refresh my memory, tell me again. And so I went back and pulled my notes again, and I'm looking at, of course, the intent. So it does refer to a person that dies or sustains serious bodily injury. But then I'm looking at the pros for this bill, and Mike Guinan from the Criminal Bureau Chief on behalf of the Attorney General came in and he said 2/3 of overdoses in the U.S. are fentanyl. 2 milliliters is lethal, which is equivalent to a few grains of salt. Then I went down the list, Patrick Condon, Jennifer she's a sergeant with OPD in narcotics, Pat Dempsey, and then Robert Griffith, who, and Michael, who's the parent of Taryn. So very compelling prose. And then I came across this 3-minute Nebraska judiciary testimony, and I'm just going to read parts of it. I know I don't have a lot of time, but it kind of hit home for me, and I remember this dad coming in. It says, "I am the father of a 16-year-old son who was poisoned and killed last November 11th by a counterfeit pill. I will never see him again. I will never be able to see what he would have become in life. The person responsible for supplying the poison will likely never be held accountable." And I circled the word never. I use the word poisoning because that's exactly what it is. A person unlawfully created a pill to look like another drug, and in this case, AJ thought it was Percocet, but instead of the pill contained no Percocet, but a lethal dose of fentanyl. To my knowledge, it is not common for a person to die from taking a single Percocet tablet, and in fact, very unlikely. This is where I have a hard time wrapping my head around the law. If I was to serve my wife a glass of antifreeze and tell her it was Kool-Aid and she drank it and died, I certainly would be charged with murder. I would expect nothing less. But if I create a poison pill and sell it as another relatively harmless drug that ends up killing someone, I am not guilty of a serious crime. How can this be? Where's the logic? And most importantly, where is the deterrence to a drug dealer? Then in his closing remarks, he said, "I don't support LB 137 because I want to see mass incarceration, which we've alluded to earlier. In fact, I want to see quite the opposite. I want to arm local prosecutors and law enforcement with the tools they need to do their job and to serve as a concrete deterrent. Today, you each have the opportunity to make an impact and say, not in my state, not in Nebraska. This bill can save lives and bring justice to those who have lost their lives and the families left behind to suffer as a result. Had this law been in place last year, maybe instead of being here today, I would be at home with my son." So I think sometimes we have to look at the compelling testimony from folks that come into our committees and testify. And I think sometimes we have to trust their judgment that they have firsthand experience to these cases, and we can sympathize with them and their plight. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Ibaugh. Senator Bosson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Between the last round of debate and this round of debate, did some further looking into this crisis in anticipation that we would likely get to learn a lot more about it. So I'm now going to focus on an article that came out of Omaha. This is titled Omaha Mother Fights for Fentanyl Awareness After Son's Death. It is dated December 18th, 2023. An Omaha mother is hoping to prevent fentanyl poisoning deaths by sharing her own story of loss. Christy Wishnak's world unraveled in December of 2019. The oldest of her 6 children, 28-year-old Zachary Eugene Bieber, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, went to visit his grandmother in Springfield, Missouri. She's quoted, "He had battled addiction off and on probably since his late teens. He'd actually been doing really well. He'd been sober for a little over a year, so it came as quite a surprise to us," said Wishnak. Wishnak said Zach took drugs not knowing they were laced with fentanyl, and he overdosed. They ran all the tests, and his death certificate came back as accidental overdose with fentanyl. So we get to live with that every single day, knowing there was something that could have been avoided. told Wishnack. Zach had chosen to be an organ donor. His kidneys, liver, lungs, and heart saved 4 other men's lives. To know that we gave that Christmas miracle to other families so they get to enjoy their kids and their wives and their family is just a little bit of hope that that the holidays give back to us now every year, said Wishnack. A global audience. Wishnack now advocates for fentanyl awareness and organ donation on the pageant stage. She's beautiful. While competing, she also talks about naloxone, which is also known as Narcan, and overdose reversing nasal spray. I think Narcan needs to be in every single home. People need to have it. It needs to be in our schools, places of employment. It's the first response to saving people, said Wishnack. The Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services has a free naloxone distribution program with the spray available at pharmacies across the state. Nebraska Medicine also offers take-home opioid overdose rescue kits, take-home opioid overdose rescue kits upon request. Wishnack also wants to dispel stigmas associated with drug use that she feels prevent people from talking to their loved ones about the subject. Quoted, "I feel like sometimes when I tell people that my child died of an overdose, I get this weird look because there's this stigma that there's this stigma to it that I must have done something wrong, or, it's only somebody that has a substance abuse problem, and that's just not the case," said Wishnack. Fighting the trafficking system. So according to the Drug Enforcement Administration, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid meant to be used in the medical field for pain relief. It is 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin, according to the DEA. 2 milligrams of fentanyl is considered, thank you, a potentially lethal dose, said Special Agent in charge of the DEA's Omaha Division, Justin King. Now we're seeing a drug that is on the street that somebody can take just 1 pill and it can kill them because we're seeing lethal amount of fentanyl put into these fake pills, King said. DEA statistics showed last year in the United States, 110,000 people died of a drug overdose, with fentanyl accounting for nearly 70% of those deaths. King said most of the time, buyers don't realize that what they're buying contains fentanyl. I'll continue when it's my next turn on the mic reading this article, and I'm happy to share it if anyone would like to see it as well.
Thank you, Senator Bosson. Mr. Clerk for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Judiciary reports Legislative Bill 341-974 to general file and 1096 to general file with committee amendments attached. An amendment to be printed from Senator Hardin to LB 1120. Senator Lippincott, an amendment to LB 52A. Senator McKinney, an amendment to 1413. In addition to that, an announcement that the reference committee will meet in room 2102 upon recess. Transportation and Telecommunications will hold an executive session 1113 following its hearing at 1 o'clock today.
Hold off on your. That's all I have this time. Yeah,
That's all I have at this time.
Senator Bosson would like us to recognize 48 fourth graders from St. Joseph School here in Lincoln, Nebraska. They are in the north balcony. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska State Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for another item.
Finally, Mr. President, Senator Day would move to recess until 1:30 p.m.
You've heard the motion. All of those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. Senator Wayne, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order.
Please state your point.
I really don't have one, but I wanted the kids to see that we actually talk on the mics. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are recessed till 1:30.